Buckle up, because we're merging back into traffic on Radio Nemo's Nemo Nation.
Really quickly, by the way, Dave is going to be appearing on Mike Roast's podcast a little bit. He's actually recording it tomorrow, and we'll have the details for you tomorrow as well. And in the last half hour, we'll tell you where you can check out Mike's podcast. Hope you guys can find your way over. He does a pretty terrific job, as you know. Does a terrific job here on Nemo Nation, and we're always thrilled to have him. This is the continuation, by the way, of a conversation we only had 15 minutes for. We're giving it the last, what I call, conversational half hour before we get to the post trip in the last hour of the show. This is part of an urgent action call against fraudulent and non-compliant training providers that undermine public safety and exploit students. The folks we're talking to today are the exact opposite of that. They are kind of leading the charge to make sure that both the people who are hiring people, but more importantly, the human beings who are going into classrooms aren't being taken advantage of. And before we get to any of that, I'm going to let Dave do the introductions.
Thank you very much, Jimmy Mack. And it's great to have them back, too. And they were here just last week. Andy Poliakoff, the executive director of CVTA, the Commercial Vehicle Training Association, and Jeff Burkhardt. He is the CVTA chairman, and he is also the senior director of operations at
Commercial
Ancora.
Driver Training for Ancora.
Commercial Driver Training at Ancora Training. And Andy, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning to you. Appreciate y'all having us on.
Yeah.
And
Hey.
Jeff, good morning to you, too. And it's good to have you back.
It's my pleasure. Good to be back with friends. Thank you.
Well, you know, it still says you are the new CVTA chairman. I'd hang on to that new as long as I can. You know what I'm saying? Because you can always say, well, I'm new. I really don't know that much yet. I've been using that for years. But good morning.
Well, I don't have quite your tenure, Dave, but yeah, it's a pleasure serving this association in that capacity. It's just a fantastic group in general, and I love your intro as far as what we are all about in terms of advocating for safety and whether it's a regulatory scope or whatever the case may be. So, really appreciate this opportunity.
Andy, let's I'm going to kind of put this into perspective. You come to us, this conversation is happening at both a moment of maximum crisis, but also maximum opportunity. And I wanted to frame it that way because, a lot of times cometh the moment and people fail. You guys are actually uniquely positioned. You've had a plan for a while. You've had ideas for a while. You guys have been talking this stuff and brainstorming this stuff. So it isn't like, well, we don't have a plan. You guys are ready for this moment, are you not?
Yeah, that's a great. I love your positive take on that. Maximum, crisis, but maximum opportunity. That's just the sort of sentiment, Jimmy, we need on a Monday morning to get things rolling for everybody. But yeah, we have been shouting about this at CVTA and thinking strategically about how to fix it for quite some time, a number of years, frankly. And yeah, it seems that the sort of the national microphone is aimed, is finally in front of us as we do that shouting and strategic talking. But, I think everyone became acquainted with really the really tragic and problematic nature of this when folks, became aware of this crash in Florida in August. I will give folks a quick update that even this past weekend you may have seen there was another individual, non-English speaker that caused a wreck in Indiana, and they were from Illinois. And so this is something that just keeps being on the national radar. But we've been focused on this for some time. I think the maximum opportunity component comes from the fact that, thank goodness and understandably, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the FMCSA are really, because of the spotlight that has been cast on this, really animated to continue enforcement. We've seen that take shape in a number of different ways. But, we are, offering strategic, advice to those, to FMCSA and USDOT, and we're very thankful that we may be able to advance, some greater enforcement actions.
We had last week when you guys were on
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, sorry about that. Time does fly. We learned about the TPR, the Training Provider Registry, and I kind of compare. I didn't even know there was one, and But I knew about the NRCME, the National Registry of Certified Medical Examiners, because that was, just bandied about several years ago. It was a big thing. And it's kind of like the same thing. So we had a system to forestall all of the problems that you guys are trying to fix already in place, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's something that, CVTA has advocated for well over a decade, and many organizations came together to create this entry-level driver training final rule, which,
right.
Was passed in 2016, and then finally became enforceable federal law in 2022. But so it creates this training provider registry where anyone that's going to provide the training, whether they're a municipality, an employer, a motor carrier, or a school that trains people from the public, has to be on this registry. But the problem is that that registry only really requires self-certification, right? You just sort of, raise your hand and say, yeah, we're licensed, we're doing this training the right way, which has caused a great need for enforcement. Now, the states pay a lot of attention to this on their own already. And so the states have been alerting to the FMCSA to the fact that there are unlicensed providers or providers who are up to no good in their states. But what we're finding is that the FMCSA has been horrendously slow in removing or analyzing, in removing those entities from the TPR. And so that's why we see that only 94, according to the FMCSA's own figures, only 94 have been removed since they began enforcing this in 2022. And that's with thousands and thousands. I mean, first of all, there's tens of thousands of entities on the registry, and there's thousands more that are, quote, under review, having received a notice of proposed removal, but there are only 94 that have been removed. And so when you see, this whole sort of maelstrom of non-domiciled, licenses or, folks lacking in English language proficiency, these are all, especially the English language proficiency, is all part of this, sort of landscape of bad actors in the training space and taking advantage of the system.
Because they can take advantage of the system because the system has enough holes in it to drive a fleet of trucks through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Jeff, I wanted to kind of throw this to you as well, too, because, in September, you guys basically, CVTA, a lot of folks just basically said, come on, what is going on here? And the problem is it's not only the holes, it's the slowness of the enforcement. I mean, everybody's in favor of due process when it comes to being charged with a crime, but we're not talking about being charged with a crime. We're just talking about getting bad actors out of a system here. In regards to how this plays out, what would you like to see in regards to how this is dealt with? I mean, faster, of course, is the simplest answer, but how do we go about doing this in a way that really lets people know there's a new marshal in town, especially with Derek Barrs being onboarded? How do we go about the business of really making sure this is one of those moments that has to happen quickly? I mean, they're pulling people off the road. That's the absolute truth. But when Andy came on the show before, Jeff, we talked about the idea that this will go on and on as long as it's targeting drivers and not the providers. And I'm calling them providers of CDLs because they're not basically letting people earn them. They're handing them out and putting them out there on the road. How do we deal with this?
Yeah, great question. And the confirmation of Derek Barrs was actually, incidentally, one of the handful of things that the CVTA was pushing. So we're very confident that's going to be very fruitful for him and for the sector. But there are levers to pull for immediate enforcement. And just one example, and this is just a microcosm, but many states, whether it be the Department of Education or whether it be the DMV, they already regulate CDL training providers. They have the curriculum content requirements, they have instructor requirements, just training program requirements, just as an example. So they do the in-state certifications. A quick cross-reference. In other words, if you are a provider, and I love the fact that you use the term provider and not school, because I do take umbrage with some of these actors portraying themselves as schools. But if you are listed on the training provider registry, open to the public for enrollment, then by virtue of that, you should also meet the requirements of your given state. And that is already explicitly noted in the training provider registry before any applicant wishes to be added to the training provider registry. In other words, you're already self-certifying, self-attesting to. But unfortunately, these bad actors, they don't care, as any criminal does not care about regulations by virtue of being, defining it as a criminal. I mean, there are people that are clicking through the I attest to check boxes with no more thought than what you do whenever you download a new app. Yeah, I'm aware of the penalties. I'm aware, and then they click through, and then they go about their way as far as, trying to make their business. And unfortunately, one of the byproducts of that, other than what we have just mentioned, is that as a result of the training provider registry being implemented, over 2.5 years ago, going on 3, is that all of a sudden, going on 4, is that now there are other organizations that are utilizing the TPR as the litmus test. Whereas before the TPR, they may have done their own due diligence with either the state certification or validating on their own. Now they're simply asking, literally asking the question of, are you listed on the TPR? The answer comes back yes, and then they take it at face value. That whenever I say they, it could be an employer that is sponsoring an employee to go to a school. It could be a workforce development board that is looking for training providers to supply CDL training for individual, clients of theirs. So not only is the TPR environment no longer sterile, and it hasn't been for quite a while, to exacerbate the problem is that now it is also becoming the de facto litmus test on whether a provider is legitimately meeting the requirements of the TPR.
I'm kind of staggered here, and I want to make sure our listeners understand what what Jeff has said here, because man, it's just Jeff, I'm gonna repeat back to you in kind of kernelized form what you've just told me, and tell me if I got it right. In the past, a lot of organizations would have done actual diligence, meaning they would have looked up a series of different sources to make sure that the person who they were onboarding or the person who they were looking at had in fact had gone through the proper motions to get to that point. Because of the creation of this institution, because of this situation, they're simply looking at one thing. That thing is not up to speed, and yet they assume that it is, which means rather than fix the problem, it's accelerated the problem. How am I doing?
You're doing great. That's exactly it. And that's what I mean by it exacerbates the problem. You cannot, by definition, you cannot rely on a faulty source for legitimacy. And now that the TPR has been inundated with a proliferation of bad actors, that no longer can be the source. It never should have been. That is a given because of the state requirements, et cetera. However, once it is implemented, it becomes a very simple reference point for folks, and anybody can click away at the TPR and see what providers are on there, and then they can make their decisions from there. And whenever you can't discern between the bad actors and the good actors, and you just say, well, they're on the TPR, so they must be okay, right? Well, the answer is no, not entirely. And that is why the enforcement of the TPR is essential. And as far as the immediate actions, there have been plenty of discussions as far as, okay, do we audit the TPR providers? Do we do this? How do we do things on the back end? Well, we have to understand that these are providers that are already there. So you can't just necessarily go in a unilateral direction. Put it this way. If your house is flooding, I don't think any reasonable person, the first thing they're going to do is well, how am I going to pay for the repairs? Should I call a plumber? What do I do? No, the very first thing you do is you're going to cut the main. You're going to cut it off at the head before you get any other, and this is an analogy, before your house starts flooding, you're going to cut the water main first, and then you're going to deal with the rest. Well, the CVTA is implored for the same in regards to the FMCSA and how they operate the TPR. Let's cut it off at the front end first, while simultaneously working on policing and enforcing the existing regulations, with emphasis on existing regulations for those that are currently on the TPR.
And
go ahead, Andy. Go ahead.
Well, and I'll add that that's really, we have, I think, been pleased to see that that USDOT and FMCSA have taken, the urgent action, in this other area of the sector in terms of an interim final rule. I think this is right for, an urgent interim final rule that was, that's enforceable immediately, or an executive order that put that in motion from even the Trump administration. Look, let's get to cut the water main, is to follow Jeff's analogy. Let's, require mandatory re-registration of these entities to train the public. Let's require expedited removal of bad actors. Let's allow states, as we've discussed, let's allow these states to remove bad actors from the TPR. All these things could be done. I mean, people have even talked about, requiring a surety bond for becoming a trainee provider. That's something that's already required in the freight broker space. Many states already require that to be a third-party tester. There are tools in FMCSA's toolbox, and we're keen to ask them to use that. We're also appreciative of the fact, in a fairly recent past, the secretary, the US DOT has become more interested in this. So we believe there's, Jimmy, you talk about maximum crisis and maximum opportunity. We believe that US DOT and FMCSA are going to be working to make this better, but we really need urgency. We have tools that create urgency. We've seen that US DOT is not scared to use those urgency mechanisms, and we want to see those used now.
Guys, it seems to me almost a dereliction of duty that the FMCSA allows, say, for ELDs, self-certification. And every other week we get 2 or 3 that are knocked off the list, but somebody has to bring up a problem for that to happen. It was a bad unit before it got knocked off the list, if you know what I'm saying. It was on the list. Why was it on the list? Now we have the same thing with the TPR. Is the problem, what is the basic core root problem? Is the basic core root problem that FMCSA doesn't really care? And the reason I say that is, do you remember when, speed limiters was the big thing for a while, and FMCSA put out a proposed rule that said, well, pick a speed, 60, 65, 68, whatever you think, come back with that number and then we'll work on it. They didn't want to fool with it, evidently. Are they too small, and are they underfunded to handle something this big and this complicated and deal with 50 states all at the same time?
And answer in a way that doesn't piss them off.
Jeff, why don't you
you're
take
right.
this? Yeah.
Is that an unfair question? I mean,
whether
if it is, just say
whether
so.
They
but
are derelict
yeah.
in their lack of efforts. I think is it's a reasonable question. Now, to be fair, they absolutely do care and they absolutely are concerned. However, those two terms are relative. It's what do you do with that? We have positioned several different items that they could immediately put in place. A lot of these were just already discussed today and a couple of weeks ago. Now, whether the bureaucratic machine bogs things down, yes, you make a great point there in respect to the rights and authorities of 50 states in one district in terms of how they conduct the business and whatnot. And that's why we've tried to, in our view, simplify things with some real common sense approaches, utilize the existing regulations on the books, rely on your state partners who, again, already certify, a majority of them already certify in one shape or form the CDL training providers within their states. So lean on them, true collaborative effort, and then you go from there. Now, in terms of the efficacy and the efforts put forward so far, I'll be quite frank with you. We believe it is entirely too slow. Only having 94 providers removed over the course of going on 4 years is woefully inadequate. We don't need these disasters to happen, these tragedies. I'm not going to say, or Andy certainly would not either, is that we told you so. But to be an intellectually honest argument, you can definitely correlate the lack of enforcement at so many different levels, and I'm speaking specifically to this Florida tragedy, but that incident can be replicated elsewhere. It just hasn't happened yet, or it just hasn't been brought to the forefront yet, and it's such a magnitude in terms of that accident goes. But it's guaranteed. These things are being conducted every day. Violations, the allowance to let them go, to not enforce everything that are still on the books. There are bad actors on there now, hundreds of them. There were yesterday, and there will be tomorrow, unless they take some legitimate, quick-acting authorities, whether it be through an executive order, whether it be through Secretary Duffy just immediately doing the mandate. We saw how things made news very quickly this year, right? President Trump's executive order in terms of English language proficiency. A few weeks ago, when Secretary Duffy announced that non-domiciled individuals, they would no longer, they would lose their privileges or not gain them in terms of commercial driving. These things can happen very quickly. It's just a matter of who's going to do it and when.
I'm going to see if I can pull this together in a way that, Andy, tell me if I get this right. The ultimate goal here is to actually move quickly to slow things down. And I don't mean that, I mean that in a positive way. In the same way that there are many people who believe the best immigration policy is a big door with strong border. Big door, strong walls. In that, if we want to get the most efficient and safest workforce out there, we can go back to Jeff's analogy of cut the water main off, stop this unstopped flow of water into the system, cut off the main, and then go back and fix the problem by setting up a situation that allows a lot of safeguards and a lot of switches that prevent flooding the system, as it were, with unqualified drivers. So the idea is to act quickly to stop the flow and then create a system that slows down the flow and allows people who are doing the proper levels of training to engage in that and prevent this sort of churn and burn, sort of CDL mills from ever catching any speed at all whatsoever. So basically what we're talking about here is cutting off, going back, tossing everybody out who doesn't live up to the process because they're not being charged with a crime, they're not entitled to due process. Toss everybody off, start again with the people who are ready to go, and then slowly rebuild the American trucking industry's workforce by using, CVTA and our friends at the National Association of Public Funded Truck Driving Schools and people who actually are playing by the rules, but to honor them by cutting the pipeline off on the rest of those folks. Sorry to talk in big picture, but that's really kind of the goal here. Have I got that right, Andy?
Absolutely. And look, we know that at times the FMCSA has been keen to, review and make sure that folks are licensed properly, that they, have their T's crossed and their I's dotted. They've done some of that, but they just haven't done it on a scale that we would say is even approaching, what's required, right? So if you could do it state by state, you could do a re-registration of all of these public the entities that train the public. That would be stopping the flow of bad actors into the space by making them re-register. Also, giving states the ability to remove bad actors from the TPR would go a long way. You mentioned the not having been charged with the crime concept, right? You don't have a right to be on the TPR, right? This is not you've been charged with the crime and your civil liberties are being threatened, and we have to have duplicative.
You don't meet the standard. You don't meet the standard. You don't get to be on the list. It's like you don't hit the checklist, so you can't be on the list. Nobody's telling you your civil rights are being violated here. You don't have a right to hand out CDLs to anybody that shows up. So I get pissed off about this too. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, absolutely, and I don't want to rally you up there, Jimmy, but I'll tell you, given the conversations that we have with some of the states that are dealing with this stuff, what they tell us would absolutely curl your hair, because we find instances where states have reported to the FMCSA that we as this particular state have we're in litigation with this bad actor. We've ordered them to cease and desist. We've determined that they're up to no good in our state and in other states, and FMCSA almost begins to act as a de facto defense counsel for those bad actors. And it's really surprising and strange, and we need the USDOT and the new leadership at FMCSA to really come in and just create a new system. Again, we know that the people at the FMCSA care about this, but they do. We've worked with them for years. A lot of respect for a lot of the things that they've done to advance this issue. We consider them partners, but we really need a comprehensive reanalysis and an urgency to be put in place by the new leadership at FMCSA and by the secretary.
Yeah, and by the way, you don't worry, you're not going to fire me up too much more, because anytime Matt Beach calls, I have one of two things I know is coming: either a complaint about the quality of Tennessee football or what the hell is going on in the training sector. It's like a consistent, oh, Matt Beach is calling, it must be about Tennessee won, so it's got to be about something going on in the training sector. When it's Tennessee lost, I know what's coming. Yeah, I totally understand. And it's an ongoing sense of frustration, because it's not the easiest fix in the world, but it is a simple one. It's just simply, let's get down to the business of getting these bad actors out of the system. And the combination of that and some of the other, and you guys really have been pitching this, Jeff, as kind of like an overall, this would like complete the effort they're trying to make to get bad actors off the road. Let's go right to the head of the hydra, right? I mean, this is really putting a flame at the head of the hydra, since we're playing Analogy Day today, right?
It's Analogy Day, and Andy, not a bad reference whenever you talk about curling hair, if you're talking to Jimmy, by the way. But absolutely, it is all related. We quickly identified that there was a proliferation. We're not talking about this as like brand new. And, February 7th, 2022, it didn't take long after that, whenever there were hundreds of providers being registered on the TPR. There was an immediate problem. And you know what? I just say, if these folks, heck, if they were surgeons or pilots, that's a perfectly good analogy.
Yep.
If it was determined in some fashion that they were not credentialed correctly, whether it's just outright false training, or whatever the case may be, similar realm of what we're speaking to now, there would be an immediate cease of activity. And that's the CVTA and us, good actors in this space in terms of training providers. We police ourselves, obviously, from the beginning, but we are that passionate that these folks should immediately be removed from becoming hazards, active hazards, to the public space. They're out there on our roads, thousands and thousands of drivers, obviously, out there earning their keep, hundreds of thousands. They're doing it right. But as we've seen from tragedies lately, it doesn't take much at all. And for one accident at that level is just one too many. And what they've uncovered as what possibly led to that, and there's a direct correlation of lack of enforcement to what happened, that is a tragedy, and that should get everybody's attention. And it has. It just needs to be like, where do you go from here? Being aware of it is one thing, but that is of little value unless it moves you into actions.
Andy Poliakoff and Jeff Burkhardt have joined us this morning. That is the executive director of the CVTA and the new CVTA chairman. We're going to keep on using that new to keep you, immunized against any sort of attacks. He's also the senior director of operations of commercial driver training at Ancora Training. Both are friends of the show, and both are actual friends. It's good to have you back on. I told you, Andy, we'd get you a full throttle opportunity to kind of talk about this in detail. Thank you for making the time, both of you.
Thank you all so much.
You got it.
Our pleasure. Thank you all.
You got it, guys. We'll be seeing them sooner rather than later.